Welcome to Theater and Stream, a film podcast. I am Matt, that is Chuck, this is episode 80. Folks, it's 2026, and around here that means new year, new movies. We've got a very, very interesting movie to kick things off. 28 years later, The Bone Temple. It's the second installment in the unlikely trilogy continuation of the 28 horror series. And this time, Danny Boyle, he's handed the reins off to director Nia DaCosta. And we all kind of know what happened the last time that Boyle kind of tried to shirk his directing responsibilities. So can DaCosta measure up to Boyle? We're going to discuss that in today's featured review. But otherwise, in probably this shortened episode, we've got one newsworthy item that's going to have all the Star Wars fans chanting in the streets, ding dong, the witch is dead. And then we've also got a very abbreviated watch list. And since it is a new year, I'm going to remind you people, please do like, please do subscribe, just to let us know how we're doing here. Chuck, otherwise, any other New Year's tidings or anything of the sort?
Oh, just that I didn't have a chance to watch a goddamn thing this week. Between getting back from my visit to the Twin Cities, and trying to get back into the swing of things in person in the office. All I really have time for in the evenings lately is like maybe some time on my Steam Deck and watching Paw Patrol or Super Mario again. Like we put on, I forget which random movie for Luca the other night. What was it? It was Minions. We just put the first Despicable Me on for some variety, and that fucking kid, he just sat there, and any time a Minion said or did anything, he just cracked the fuck up. So I don't know what those Frenchmen did, but they like hacked into something primordial, into like the minds of children that is relatable and fun, and I guess like 40-year-old trailer trash people on Facebook that you're still friends with. There's something that's just totally universal about those things, and it still doesn't make sense to me. But I'll tell you what does make sense to me. Whatever the fuck everyone was on when they plotted out this 28 years later like reboot situation. We're gonna get to that. Obviously very excited about that. But yeah, more than anything, like, I don't know, I'm so gun shy that it has been 4 fucking years, Matt, of somebody, whether it's like the wackos, who go on like the Critical Drinkers After Hours, or if it's like actual tenured, credible industry press, there's always been this undercurrent that, yeah, Kathleen Kennedy's going to be fucking leaving Disney and Star Wars like imminently, and that imminently never came. Even when she was like cacklingly being like, yeah, I'm going to retire someday, like, which was like where we were last year. But apparently officially we've had the exit interview in Variety, and Kathleen Kennedy is done. And what do we make of this? Like, should we celebrate? Like, should she be celebrated? Does she deserve any credit for the genuine billions of dollars that these Disney Star Wars movies made, or is her legacy tainted? Does it all just depend on like how much of a radical wacko you are about pop culture, or like objectively, this woman achieved a lot in this job she was given, and I got to give her flowers in that respect.
Yeah, people kind of have to remember that Kathleen Kennedy, at the end of the day, is an executive. She's not creative. Doesn't have a creative mind. She was put in the role to ultimately make money, and she accomplished that. And by accomplishing that, she accomplished that mission through some very, very spotty things. She was, she had probably more failures than successes. She did have a few successes, between things like Andor, Rogue One, depending on who you ask, I guess The Force Awakens.
Yeah.
And then, of course, she had a lot of failures, which sort of outnumber her successes mostly for the fact that a lot of these things didn't come to fruition. You know, it's you look at I read her whole exit interview that she did with Variety, and she doesn't shy away from dropping some bombs, but more than anything, the interviewer is very, very conscious to try and get an update from her about every single frickin' project that they have
Yeah.
announced in the last like couple years. And it's like, it's just the sheer number of projects that are on like either on the back burner or are mostly dead but maybe somewhat still alive. It's mind-boggling. And so yeah, that's kind of my ultimate thing that I took away was like, God, we need to get somebody in here who can cut the shit and put, we're stop announcing stuff before it hasn't even a pen has not touched paper,
Yeah.
because that's what a lot of this stuff is. And so yeah, I don't know, what did you make of this?
Well, yeah, like that, like what you're referring to there specifically, I found very illuminating. Because what do we have in production for a like theatrical Star Wars film right now? Like half of the stuff on that list was announced before the Mandalorian and Grogu even entered the public consciousness as characters. You know,
Mhm.
and and then this Starfighter movie starring Ryan Gosling that no one ever thought of or asked for. It's such a left field thing to be so advanced in its process that we're getting set photos from it. But like what's her fake fucking name, Shamoy, who's gonna be doing the Rey Star Wars movie? Like where the fuck is that? They could have been doing that this whole fucking time. And why haven't they? Like so if I'm gonna, you know, like there's the initial successes, box office wise, but then you look at all of the treasure that they spent, that Disney spent not only on getting the rights to this stuff, but then what they made. Like Andor is well, respected. It's up there. It's it's pinnacle of television, but it cost them $600 million. And how many people were getting Disney Plus subscriptions just to watch that? And
Yeah,
and and maybe that's even
none.
the like I kind of feel a little bit like the when I think of the economics of the industry right now, I feel a little bit like the BlackBerry guy who doesn't realize that cell phones are moving towards data. You know what I
Mm.
mean? So there's something happening that we aren't appreciating, I think. And because like how do you explain this? Like how could these streaming services, like they exist because they need to, because people want them, but they aren't profitable in the same way. And the industry hasn't corrected yet in a way that's healthy. They're just embracing these choices that I think are kind of like it's like giving a cancer patient morphine and nothing else. You're not
Mm.
actually doing anything to like help them get better. You're
Yeah.
just helping them live with the pain a little bit longer. Um, but yeah, how many of those weird like projects are we gonna get? Is that Feige movie ever gonna happen? Or there's so many random trilogies between, the Ryan Johnson stuff I found the most illuminating, and her
Mm.
comments just about the fate that awaits any female creative who's working in the Star Wars realm. Just found that so annoying.
Mm.
And I am going to sound a little bit like the crowd that I was mocking earlier, but that's been my beef with like pop culture going back 10 years now. I feel like such an old man. But like what I hated about like that Ghostbusters 2016 movie was that same mentality they carried into Star Wars. And it led to some really cringy shit that a lot of people made a lot of money mocking. And
Mm.
we weren't them because we didn't watch The Acolyte. We knew better, just for our own
Mm.
sakes. And we're just not a profit driven enterprise anyway. And there was nothing to be gained from watching it. But like when that is your legacy, and then you're just trying to tidy it up by saying, oh, it's just mean men, who just don't like women, you playing with their toys.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's, I don't know, you might disagree, like, and I'd love to maybe dig into that a little bit more, because we skate around the really dicey issues sometimes.
No, I agree with you. I think that, yeah, Kathleen Kennedy, she was overly focused on, I wouldn't call, I don't necessarily think she actually cares about these issues. She's overly focused on them in the sense of a sort of corporate stooge
Yes,
trying,
I will. Yeah,
trying, she's trying her best to skirt the line of like still keeping things relatively inoffensive, but trying to also have some sort of political message. And ultimately it washes out as kind of just this really blah, like, yeah, girls rock type,
yeah,
very like very, very sanitized message. And it's kind of lame on all fronts, in my opinion. And I think that, you know, when millennials are kind of, we're aging into irrelevance, basically, where a lot,
I'll let you say your point, but then
yeah,
I'm gonna countermand
like
that.
a lot of us, a lot of millennials now are beginning their sort of mid to late 30s. And of course, that is sort of the age at which and the entertainment industry stops looking at you as the sort of dominant force in pop culture. And so Gen Z is now sort of moving into that space. And what we're sort of finding is Gen Z actually thinks that, in much the same way that, we looked at our, millennials looked at like Gen Xers, Gen Z is looking at us with kind of the side eye, kind of the like, millennials caring about social issues is cringe. That's basically what Gen Z looks at us
Yeah,
like. And
yeah,
so I think a lot of that stuff is starting to fall off now. This sort of, caring, or at least appearing to care about things, like how many women do you have in speaking roles in this movie, regardless of whether or not that makes sense as a concept or that makes sense for the script, stuff like that. I think that that's sort of falling out of favor with Gen Z because they look at it as antiquated. Um, yeah, it's just I don't agree with that particular way of looking at things, and I think that that'll probably fall off with the introduction of the new CEOs, Dave Filoni and this Lin-Wen Brennan, who I had mentioned before
yeah.
we started the show, are sort of taking the dual CEO roles of creative person and exec person. And but yeah, what did you have to say
Yeah,
before we get?
really quick. Because did you watch the Red Letter Media episode that they just put out about Deep Space Nine?
I didn't. I saw it. I saw it come out, but I'm holding off because I actually want to watch Deep Space Nine before I watch
Oh,
that. But yeah,
yeah.
what about it?
Well, it's really funny because it's a part one of two, which is
Okay.
not something that they usually do for these season retrospectives. I think they just kind of dig into them, and they've just so. And then previously, like with the Next Generation, they did the first season in one giant episode, but in this one, they spent more time talking about something that I think applies to this, because it's like how is the fandom actually reacting to what you're giving them,
Mhm.
whether across the generations, the especially in Trek land, the old school fans like them just can't handle all the wacky bullshit that millennial writers have been doing to the stuff that they grew up appreciating. Like I haven't watched Strange New Worlds,
Mhm.
but when you have like like an episode where people are just like doing Broadway show tunes for like because of a weird virus or something, or everyone is a Muppet, like you're doing other shit that has nothing to do, like you are tickling someone's giblies that doesn't give a shit about psycho like technobabble and Star Trek stories. Like
Mhm.
you're just doing Doctor Who nonsense essentially. And that's what they were. And what they were kind of pointing at was that Gen Z doesn't like a lot of this shit. And what they are doing is going back and watching the old Trek, like
Mhm.
Deep Space Nine or like the Next Generation, and they are realizing, oh, like this was their perception of it, and I have seen it echoed in like a lot of these like people who are watching Trek for the first time, and they're watching every single episode and talking about it on YouTube. I forget the name of the actual show, but I love listening to their clips because they are exactly who Red Letter Media are talking about, and that's what they're appreciating, is that there's actual characters, there's actual stories, and they're like actually have a focus to the writers room that doesn't
Mhm.
exist today. And and I think what we are maybe going to see with Gen Z and Star Wars here is that they are like, and maybe it's different because Star Wars was a lot more entrenched in pop culture, in a general way than Star Trek was, over the last 20 to 30 years. So like every little kid who grew up Gen Z and had their parents show them Star Wars for the first time. I'm assuming. Maybe not. But the I think there is going to be this switch that happens where they are going to have to stop catering towards this new audience they wanted to target, that didn't quite latch on in the same way, and find some way to bring back into the fold. Like there's politics to this. It's fandom politics, but they're gonna have to do something to get like all of the old guard in Star Wars back on board again somehow. And they haven't quite done it yet. Like the Andor and the Mandalorian to an extent did do that, but they got to do it in the movies. I guess
Mhm.
that's my soapbox. So yeah, tell us more about this. What is, you gave me these graphics of like a mama kill. So
Yeah.
are we worried about Dave Filoni being one of these guys?
I think some people are because Filoni, he was very beloved for the longest time in Star Wars fandom. He was seen as like like the guy that's on our side, or like the guy
Yeah,
that, the guy who gets it.
he's gonna
And
protect
then
Lucas's vision.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so essentially what has happened, I was saying this earlier, is that they've nominated two dual CEOs. You got Dave Filoni, who's clearly going to be the sort of creative guy. And then you have this Lin-Wen Brennan, who's clearly going to be like the executive. And what they're doing here is they're doing a James Gunn, Peter Safran, DC Studios type thing, where I doubt we're after this moment, I doubt we're gonna hear anything from this Lin-Wen Brennan at all. Like, she is gonna be fully on like the exec thing. I,
But
I bet we'll barely hear anything about her. From what I understand,
she's the Kennedy acolyte, where there's a master, there's an apprentice.
yeah,
You know,
and
it's
she worked her
Scythian.
way up. Yeah, exactly. She I don't know anything about her other than that she worked her way up at ILM, I guess, and she was the
Oh,
one of the big like CEOs at ILM, and
never mind.
basically um Filoni is going to probably be the creative guy. And you know, I think Filoni has his heart in the right place. I think that he has done more good than he's done bad for Star Wars, but we can't ignore the fact that like the Book of Boba Fett really tainted his image in the eyes of many fans. And yeah, I guess we'll just have to see. I think that they are making there's little things that I see where they're sort of making, I think they're making some correct choices little by little. And the two things that I most noticed recently were, number one, they're sort of refocusing on movies, and the TV shows are taking a back seat, which is, I think, a good thing to do. I don't think Star Wars should really be TV. I think Andor was kind of a fluke. It was one of the best flukes that could possibly happen, but it was still a fluke where I don't think Star Wars is TV. I don't think Star Wars should be TV. I think it should just be movies. And number two, have you heard about the demastered versions that they're going to release?
Some of them have already kind of leaked out, haven't they?
Well, they're basically, because next year is going to be the 50th anniversary of A New Hope.
Mm-hmm.
And so the plan is that, yes, they're finally going to be releasing the demastered versions of the original trilogy back into theaters. And
hopefully into physical media, please.
Yes, yes, you would hope so. I mean, I think that's probably, that's probably the eventual route that they're going to take. But this was always a huge sort of point of contention between the fans and Kennedy. And, anytime anybody would ask Kennedy about it in interviews, she would always be like, oh, yeah, the demastered things, that would be fun to do. She would just kind of brush off the question. And I think that them finally acknowledging that people want this is something the fans want. This is something a lot of people want. I think it's a step in the right direction. And so, yeah, they're these small things that sort of give you hope,
Yeah, for sure. That's been a battle going back to Lucas. So, yeah,
Mhm.
the time has come. Yeah, 50 fucking years, man.
Yeah.
I remember seeing the special edition that when they did the theatrical run of A New Hope,
Yeah.
and getting to
Mhm.
see that. And that's the only time I've been able to see any of the original trilogy in a theater. So this would be a dream come true. But,
Mhm.
at long last, bring it down, bring it down. It's like we finally killed it, and, we can all move on, and I think that's what I'm looking forward to more than anything is that the fan discourse can just get a little uh, uh, healthier. It's been a little stale, and you know, it'll be nice to have things to talk about that are actual movies versus just all of this bullshit mudslinging that has been going on for 11 fucking years. Like we, I don't know. I'm just ready to get back to the subject of the art itself, the content itself. And on
Yes.
that note, our boy Park Chan-Wook is here and he's fucking doing something really fucking cool. That's what I'm hearing. Should I be finding a way to see No Other Choice as soon as possible, Matt?
Oh, most definitely. Yeah. This movie is I personally I liked it better than his last effort, but it's very similar to 20 I think 2024's Decision to Leave. What I would call this more than anything is balls out directing over a muted script. And it's not it's not crazy in the way that Park Chan-Wook used to be. It's funny that this is what his career has kind of evolved into. Because I remember a time when Old Boy was a legendarily dangerous movie back when it first came out. Me and my high school friends, we would talk about Old Boy as if it were illegal, as if
Yeah.
it was contraband. Like this movie was so Old Boy was so taboo and it was so radical for its time, and the fact that the only way that you could get your hands on a copy was to order it online in the beginning of the beginning days of online shopping when you would order something online and you would just kind of hope that it showed up at your doorstep. And that's what it felt like to possess this movie when you had to import it from, Korea back in the mid 2000s. It felt like you were in possession of contraband. And Park Chan-Wook at the time, he was this young nihilist who made, these dark, disgusting movies. And now more than 20 years later, he's become basically the old man nihilist he's a little more restrained. He's leaning a little bit more into like social issues. And his recent output, it's included stuff like Decision to Leave and then The Sympathizer, which I know you and I were like two of the only people on the planet who watched that show. But he's in his sort of crime thriller bag where he's he's doing these crime thrillers, these political thrillers type things, and this one is, I think, no different. This is about a guy who he gets laid off from his job at a paper factory, and he sort of is struggling to find work. He's struggling to provide for his family. And he decides that the only way to ensure that he gets another job is to literally kill off his competition, like the other people that are vying for his job. And he eventually, of course, he gets in over his head. The police start to catch on. His family starts to catch on to what he is doing, and he is trying to keep an impossible number of plates spinning. And I thought this was great. I mean, on a micro level, I really like what this is saying about people whose idea of a worthwhile existence is tied almost exclusively to their career. And what happens to those people when they lose their job? Their reason for existing is gone. And that is kind of the case in a lot of like Asian countries, most notably South Korea and Japan, where you have people who are literally being worked to death, people who are, they go to work and then they go and they party, and then they that's all they do every day. It's that sort of, that work hard, play hard mentality. And that is very alive and well in Japan. And, on a macro level, this movie, it's saying a lot about, what things like, capitalism and technological advancement and AI is doing to people's jobs. Not just unskilled labor, but now skilled labor. We are seeing jobs that people who previously thought they were irreplaceable are now being replaced. These people who went to college for, a decade of their lives to do a very, very specialized, a very, very skilled job are suddenly finding that their jobs are now being replaced by things like robots and things like AI, when they thought that they were, previously relatively safe. And yeah, I really, really like its sort of messaging. And yeah, it was great. I really, really enjoyed this. It's a little long, This movie is also exactly 2 hours and 19 minutes, just like Decision to Leave was. Huh. And you get to a point where you're kind of, or at least I was thinking, okay, Park, let's land the plane now. Let's land the plane. You're sort of hammering the same points over and over. And I wish that he, maybe trimmed like 10, 15 minutes off the runtime of this, but otherwise, very, very worthwhile entry into his filmography. I wish that he would keep doing movies. I don't want him to go back to TV. I don't know if his TV stuff has ultimately been that successful, like this, and then what was it, Little Drummer Boy, I think was the other show. Little Drummer Girl that he did, yeah.
That was a John Le Carre story.
That's right. And so, yeah, let's stick to the movies, Park. Let's kind of stick to these, once every couple years type movies. And I think you'll be good.
Right on. Well, this is high on my watch list. Probably gonna find some way over this weekend to check it out, because I love that premise. And I love that, like, when I didn't really know that that's what it was about, even based on the trailer. Mm-hmm. And now the cheeky little invitation to like all the CEOs of like all those major corporations makes a lot more sense. Because like it's funny because like you look like I have more respect for Eddington now than I did when I first saw it, but just in terms of how it explored the issue of data centers. Because it is such a sore subject here in North Dakota right now.
Oh yeah.
And and we stand to be deeply impacted by what they will do. And the only reason they want to come up here is because cooling will be so much easier because of our cold winters. Because like it's not just energy, it's water. It's like these things are literally and they're a hot button issue for me, man. Like, have you seen how much RAM costs these days? Like, even
Yeah.
like we are entering Cyberpunk 2077, where old technology is going to become infinitely more valuable, just because what is going to be available to the layman is going to be so limited. Because like
Mhm.
the reason why all these things are so expensive is because factories that haven't been built have booked chips that haven't been made, so that they can
Yeah, it's all
use. It's all
theoretical. It's
theoretical to like take, and ultimately these things will be used to hollow out every industry that mankind is used in right now. So I'm so glad you touched on that, and now I'm activated enough that I'm gonna get creative, because I don't think that my local AMC is going to be getting it.
no, no.
But moving on now to our main event, which we're going to have a lot to say about.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, my expectations were very reserved, going into this, because I know we had limited, sample sizing here, but the last time, like you alluded to, the last time Danny Boyle knocked our socks off with a movie in this franchise, and he just handed it off to the industry to do something with. It didn't work out so well. 28 Weeks Later was an okay movie, but it just was not as good or interesting as the first one, which is why 28 Years Later was so high on my list for the best movies of last year. And also why I was trepidatiously excited, because you don't see this kind of thing that often, where you have a Gaiden side story, like sequel to a sequel, but it's going to be like its own unique trilogy within a trilogy. So it's something new and exciting in that respect. And I haven't seen a lot of Nia DaCosta, but I really loved Candyman, and
Yeah, same.
I had enough faith in her to, know that she could do something with an Alex Garland script, because he's one of the best we have right now. And holy shit, like this is as a digression, it doesn't work too hard to advance the story that it left us with. What's more, because like it introduced the character of Kelson and Samson, the alpha, in the first movie, and they were the ones we wanted to know more about. So Bone Temple kind of gives us them as the centerpiece of all of this, along with Jack O'Connell's completely fucking deranged and evil, Lord Sir Jimmy Crystal, this Jimmy Savile inspired like cult leader who just leads this band of murderous, like Satanists that find survivors and do unspeakable things to them. And our poor little friend Spike is caught up with them, but he isn't the main character of this. And yes, his plight is of concern and everything, but what's more important is this experience of this little digression showing us just how fucked up and deranged this world has become in the absence of society. If you aren't in your little enclave, you are just praying and hoping you don't get killed by one of the infected. But then there's, of course, also just the fucked up other survivors out there you have to worry about. So like it's almost like a TV show where you had the great, like initial story arc given to you by the showrunner, and then the mercenary like Frank Darabont or Jeremy Saulnier is brought on board, and then they give you a great run of episodes too. And so in that way, it doesn't really feel like a movie to me. It felt like someone just working with the same sets, the same costumes, the same crew, and it's just a new director. And that might not be exactly how it worked, but that was the feeling. But it doesn't feel like a Danny Boyle movie, but it feels like a 28 movie completely. And
Mm.
on that level, 100, it's so successful. I almost like this more than than just 28 years later.
Mm.
Like taken together, they're a great package. But I will say that this one, it says, like, imagine if Quentin Tarantino didn't do volume 2 of Kill Bill, and this other person just had a different sensibility for gore than he did. So I just want to caution people, the gore in this is on another level. The horrific
Yeah.
things that happen in this are like to an extreme that a mainstream American Hollywood movie hasn't had that I can remember. This calls to mind the New French Extremity of like the late 90s, early aughts. And that is not for everybody. But at the same time, there's enough light in this to counterbalance it. And I don't know, I just really fucking loved this. And there's a lot for us to, dig into and appreciate together. So why don't you just hop in now?
Yeah, I'm largely agree with what you're saying. I like the use of the word digression, where she's picking up parts of what Danny Boyle put down, but then she's sort of leaving others, by the wayside. And we're still exploring these themes of religion, death, father figures, but this sort of all the like the Brexit stuff and like the British isolationism, that's
Yeah.
kind of put on the wayside. And I think she smartly did that because we had those archival interstitials in the first one, and like the poor man's bullet time, as Danny Boyle called it. And this is definitely a more conventional movie, I think. And I think that if she would have tried to do that type of stuff, she would have risked, people just calling it more of the same. But this is somewhere between, I think, the filming style of the original Days and then Weeks, where it's not quite gritty, DV cam, and it's not quite like the conventional realism of Weeks, but it's somewhere in between. And we have some characters that from part one that are like completely absent. We have others that are they've been demoted basically to like supporting acts, and then we have other bit parts from the first one that have been elevated to like series regulars, and I really like that aspect of it. But I think probably like the most successful thing she does here is just kind of making it her own, as far as like the look, the feel, the gore, as you said, but keeping the characters. And it's there is this sort of unavoidable question that you have to answer, and you kind of answered it in your intro of how does this stack up to part one, because it will inevitably be compared. And I think, gun to my head, I think I like part one a little better because I think it was more emotionally resonant for
That's
me.
true.
All this,
Yeah.
all this stuff with, Spike and his mom. I thought that was very, very emotionally resonant. But I think that's kind of down to the individual watcher, because there is stuff in this too that is also, resonant as far as emotions go, the bromance between Samson and Kelson and stuff like that. But what DaCosta has done here is it's a little it's a little short of miraculous, where she has thread the needle in what would typically be a lose-lose situation, where you would normally have people on one side who would be like, why is this so much like the first? And then you would have the other people on the other side saying, why isn't this like the first? And that's normally kind of an impossible situation to be in. But I think that she has kind of thread the needle here, where I think most people probably would be satisfied with the experience that they get out of this, whether they, would normally fall on the, either side of that argument. And so, yeah, I really also enjoyed myself. Although, allow me a bit of a digression here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My experience, I want to go see this in a theater again. I am going to go see this in a theater again, because my experience was thoroughly ruined by fellow theater goers for this movie.
No.
Because there was a guy, and they walked in a half hour into this movie. A half hour of this movie had already played, and this dude walks in with his like preteen kids, his, I would say, 13-year-old kids, and he sits them down in the seats, and then he leaves. He clearly has no interest in the movie. He leaves. And he starts coming back into the theater every probably 20 minutes and checking on them by shining his cell phone flashlight at them and saying, "Are you guys good? Are you guys good? Are you okay?" and then he leaves again. And he does that about every 20 minutes throughout the movie.
What
And
the
it
fuck?
was, yeah, it was infuriating. And I actually told the guy, you know, I I I have no problem with confronting dipshits at movies. It's something I've done my entire life. I expect it's something I will do. But when the movie got done with and the lights came up and the guy walked in, to collect his children, as I walked out, I just turned to the guy and I said, "Hey, thanks for ruining the movie, buddy. Thanks for just completely ruining that." And he didn't say anything. He just kind of stared at me dumbfounded, as
Anyone
if
would confront him.
yeah, as
God.
if somebody would have the gall to confront him on his bullshit. But yeah, it was awful. It was an awful experience, and yet I still loved the movie.
Oh, that that
Yeah,
that makes me so mad. You
yeah,
know, but because I'll confess, I had to find a creative way to see it just because of my situation right now. So
yeah.
my viewing experience, I was surprised by the quality of it for one, for being
Sure.
for being what it was, but it was in a German movie theater, and you know of course there are people getting up in front of the screen because it was a small theater, which is why
Okay.
this camera was able to get such a good quality image, I think.
Mhm.
But every once in a while, you just see some German guy get up and like walk in front of the screen because like if anybody was getting up, they were blocking the screen. Like that's how small of a theater we're
Sure.
talking about. And then of course I just have to applaud the 1xBet ad team because they still do their very creative, because it's Indians who actually end up pirating this shit. And
Yeah.
then because like the movie will just pause and then you'll pull out and it'll be someone in as their own zombie experience holding a cell
Oh
phone,
God.
and then they run around and then they win 1xBet and then all the zombies do a Bollywood dance and then you just go right back into the movie. So it's fun. I'm glad that they do that kind of shit. But yeah, like I need a real proper viewing of this. I have to confess myself because I had to do it by illicit means.
Mhm.
But I don't think my $15 contribution is going to hold it back, box office wise. At least I hope not.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it's pretty safe. It's probably going to be a hit. I mean, they already greenlit the third
That's
one
true.
before this one came out. So yeah, I think it's pretty safe. But yeah, I don't know where you want to go from here. I guess the biggest thing in this movie, the biggest thing that sort of eats up probably the most amount of screen time is this Dr. Kelson Samson
Yeah.
relationship. And what did you make of that?
Oh, that was the beating heart of this movie. The everything that they were doing, with the music and like the hand crank record player and like the 80s, like the 80s soundtrack, like yeah, it's like how else would this guy stay sane building his bone temple, as he's literally defleshing bodies, and bones, for it, like that's the only thing keeping him going. And it just like it broke up all the darkness because like every time that
Yeah.
you were, because when you were with the Jimmies, you knew that something awful was going to be on screen, and then you'd cut to him and he'd just be vibing to the Clash, or like whatever he was playing at the time. And this is where like the real world building happens, because there's all these weird little moments, as like leading up to Samson's recovery of his humanity. And I didn't expect that from this movie. The fact that like Kelson's like ultimate tragic role is that he figures out the cure, and
Mhm.
like we don't know how long this cure is gonna last, but the like that was the most beautiful part of it, was Samson remembering who he was, which was just a boy on a train, like at some point in his life, and reading a book about the moon, and
Mhm.
like and maybe like was that the last time was he infected shortly thereafter? I don't know, like there was just a lot of really cool things happening there, and And the shot you get of him killing that hunter where he sees almost like his own face is,
Yeah.
on him before he rips his, he de-spines him, like decraniates him, like and the shot of him eating his brains. Oh my
Yeah.
lord,
So
that
gross.
was so gross,
Yeah.
but it was very effective.
Yeah.
And I just didn't expect such a, tenderness in a movie like this involving those characters, but I guess they did kind of set it up, that he did have a special affinity for Samson, in the
Mhm.
first movie, but we see that come to fruition, in this one. And then the weird way that, Kelson interacts with Lord Jimmy too.
Yeah.
The the way that he kind of just like really reaches him where he is, and like without it being like explicit, he understands exactly what of a kind of a predicament he's in, because like who knows how many other crazies he's had to interact with, over the last 28 years.
Yeah,
But
it's interesting that Kelson is basically he's the ultimate empath where he's looking to connect with, he can connect with anyone. And he, so much so that he connects with like a homicidal psychopath in Jimmy. But then also, when you look at the cure, that he comes up with, because from what I gathered, the cure is basically a mix of like antipsychotic medications and like depression medications.
yeah,
Is that kind of what it was?
yeah,
And so um, it's interesting because when you look at the symptoms of somebody who's like infected with the rage virus, I mean, they're psychotic. And so it's only natural that somebody would assume, like, what is the cure for somebody who's acting psychotic? Oh, well, antipsychotic medications.
yeah,
And so you would think that humanity would have thought of this a long time ago and that somebody would have tried this a long
yeah,
time ago,
yeah,
but it only happens because of how empathetic Kelson is, because nobody tried this before because everybody was so busy not dying, not being murdered by these crazy people. And so it took somebody, like Dr. Kelson to try this, to even try this.
yeah.
It's such an obvious solution, I guess. And so I really like that aspect of it.
But it does beg the question: does the outside world already know about this, but they've just written off the whole island of Great Britain, as like there's no point in trying to
Mhm.
save this because, yeah, we can treat it, but it's just too dangerous for us to even bother attempting to. Like, I don't know, like because yeah, you would think that, but maybe it's because if you are infected, you're so uncontrollable and you're such a liability that they can't actually test you. And yeah,
Yeah.
it took Kelson building up rapport over time to get to that point.
Mhm.
Yeah, I thought like that was just a really awesome way to give us, some really great world building with characters we already have without like any like boneheaded exposition. It's competency porn. It's a guy figuring something out and then just explaining it, because he has to talk out loud, because he's
Mhm.
basically a castaway character.
Yeah. What do you make? I'm just curious. We already kind of mentioned him a bit, but what do you make of Jimmy as far as his like the main Jimmy, like just the way that he acts and like what do you think is behind him? What do you think he's looking for? And like his weird like obsession with like Satan and what's going on there, do you think?
Well, we have to remember, he was a vicar's son, like an
Yep.
Anglican vicar's son, and so he probably had a real religious perspective, going in, and yeah, he's living through the end of days as far as his childlike mind can comprehend. Like from the beginning of the first movie onward, and Yeah, and I guess they can fill in the blanks, if they want to with a graphic novel or something. But yeah, like that guy lived like an entire movie, of darkness. It's like how did he turn into this? Like, how long had he been doing his shtick? How long had he had his little cult? You know, like had he already run into some other kind of culty kind of like survivors group at some point? Did like how did he survive and how did he develop this? Because he survived the apocalypse from when he was a child, you know
Mhm.
and he almost needs his own movie in my opinion to like fully flesh it out. But at the same time, like, we're kind of given all that we need, just in this movie alone, I would say. The
Yeah.
because the confrontation with Kelson does so much. And and I appreciated the fact that the as soon as he sees Kelson trying to take control of the situation a little bit, once he recognizes Spike, then he's
Yeah.
like, "Oh, no, 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 that's not how this fucking works." And then like the wool just comes off of everyone's eyes so quickly, like even the ones that already were having their doubts. It's like,
Mhm.
because yeah, like if you're in this fucked up reality, it's like if you run into this group and you have to kill another person to not wind up just another one of their victims yourself, just to survive, then yeah, you're just gonna roll with whatever this weirdo presents to you, especially if you're young and you have no bearings, on the past, and you're in because he probably just killed a lot of these kids as parents and then just raised them as his own, which
Mhm.
is what's so fucked up about it, which is where the Jimmy Savile connotations get so dark, like
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
it's
it's like it's interesting because in the first movie, we don't, obviously we don't get a lot of Jimmy, but what we do get of him, you get the sense that he's taking his moral compass almost, or his whole being, his whole personality from pop culture because there's all this stuff with like the Teletubbies
yeah,
and the Jimmy Savile, and at the end of the first movie the Power Ranger like karate moves and stuff. And my sort of theory before having seen this second movie was, okay, this guy is like completely, all his stuff comes from pop culture. He is shunning his father. He's shunning, with the upside down crosses on their foreheads and stuff. But I think it's more, after seeing this, it's more complicated than that, where I think
yeah,
he is looking for a father figure. He's wanting a father figure, and he's settled on this sort of disembodied voice of Satan, I guess.
yeah, that's in his
And
head.
he's so, but he is disillusioned, I think, with his how his father acted, because what we see at the beginning of the first movie is, his father basically running into the church, and Jimmy is looking to him for like, oh, what should we do, dad? And his dad is basically acting like a shepherd for the infected at the beginning of the first movie, where he leads them all into the church and then lets them all devour him basically, or kill him.
Yeah,
And so he sees that, and yeah, he's most definitely delusioned by how much of a sort of religious zealot his father turned into in the last moments of his life. And yeah, it's very, very interesting. That character is, I mean, other than being just a complete psychopath, there's something going on there that is more interesting, I think. And yeah, you alluded to the torture scene, which was pretty rough, and
pretty rough.
the um the propane. I love the stuff with the propane tank and the hook that the pregnant lady sends down the rope, and it embeds itself in the back of that girl's head. And yeah, that was just nasty in a way that, all of these movies, every single 28 movie is pretty nasty, but
Yeah,
this movie is nasty in a its own brand, where I liked your call out of the French New Extremity, or even like I guess people would call them, or people used to call them, torture porn
yeah,
movies. It sort of harkens back to that type of nastiness, that type of violence.
it doesn't revel in it though, which is I guess what makes it different
Yeah.
from the from like Hostel,
Hmm.
that ilk. It's not just for the sake of it. Like there's an actual context to it besides sadism.
Hmm.
It. To these characters, they are giving a tribute to Satan, to old Nick. Like they're making him happy. He's delighting in the charity that they're giving these people. As they put it. Yeah, and that was interesting was the dialogue. Kind of like the inverse to like the language and the patter of Lyndon's farm, like the island sanctuary, versus the lingo that they use to talk about stuff. The, it's just a beautiful tapestry that I would not have expected to be born from the singular 28 Days Later movie. Like, and that's what makes these such great sequels because they're actually doing something with it instead of just regurgitating what we had before.
Yeah, I guess, and that leads us to kind of, I guess, where this all leads to, because we have had there is confirmed going to be a third film, and the ending, of course, we should talk about the sort of epilogue scene. Um, you know, Killian Murphy's character comes back, and we see him with presumably his daughter that he had with Naomi Harris's character from 28 Days Later, although she is not seen at all in that final scene. And then we see Spike and the unnamed girl Jimmy.
She does give
Uh,
her name at the end. I think it was like Kelly or something like that.
okay, yeah, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah.
Yeah. Now that you say that, I do remember that. I don't remember what her name was, but yeah. So they're coming up. They're running away from some infected, and Killian Murphy and his daughter basically decide to help them, and then that's kind of where it ends. But um, I guess, yeah. Where do we go from here? Where, like, do we see what happens with, what has happened to Killian Murphy's character, in these sort of interstitial years between the first two movies and this new trilogy? Does Kelson's cure die with him? Do we ever go back to Aaron Taylor Johnson's character? What are your thoughts?
I think inevitably we kind of do need to go back to Aaron Taylor Johnson's character. He's lost his wife. There's
Mhm.
now this baby that he doesn't want. And I'm sure that there's plenty of young women who could raise that baby on in the commune that they're in. But
Mhm.
I can only imagine that he's just been going out very recklessly trying to find Spike. At
Mhm.
least one would hope. And I can't believe he didn't just go right to Kelson and be like, "Where's my boy?" You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But because maybe he's being prevented from going out to look. I don't know. I would like him to show back up, but yeah, we do need to get some kind of our bearings with Jim, the good Jim. These characters are gonna have such like a moment of what the fuck when they hear that this dude's name is Jim too. After just
Yeah.
being with with Lord Jim Crystal this whole time, and so yeah, because they've obviously just been doing it on their own. Like they have their own setup. Like they seemingly haven't left the same cottage that we saw them at the end of the first one when the jet was flying over and they were like, "Oh, all hopeful, everything's gonna get better," and obviously that doesn't happen. So we need to know what happened to all the other characters from the end of that first movie. The Naomi Harris. I can't remember the other girl's name, but she was the daughter of what's his face,
Brendan Gleeson.
Brendan Gleeson's character,
Yeah.
and and maybe they were a part of the relocation to London that happened so disastrously. But I get the sense that they just never left. That they realized, oh, this is going to go badly. We're okay where we're at. Like
Mhm.
we don't need to get out of here. But then yeah, how do you persist in all of that? Like when you know that the outside world has written you off. and he hasn't given up. Obviously, he's like legitimately like giving her like an education, about history and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the direction they seem to be moving. I get the sense that, because we did get the hints from the first movie that the rest of the world has moved on and they've basically quarantined the UK as like a quarantine zone, but everywhere else is normal. And so I think that's the fact that they put that in there. It's pretty easy to then explain away the plane at the end of 28 days later, where because the assumption when the only movie that we had the only movie that we had was 28 days later. The assumption is that that plane at the end picked them up and then ferried them off to somewhere safe, but now with the context that basically the UK has been quarantined, you can easily explain away that plane as like, oh, it was just a recon plane, or it was
Yeah.
just it was just a plane that was checking on the status of the UK. It was never there to rescue them. And so that's easy to kind of explain away. And then of course you have, what were they doing between, weeks and years? What was Jim doing? He was obviously raising his kid. As you said, it looks like they stayed in their cottage they were in. One interesting thing that I did note was I don't know if there's going to be more kids, because
Oh,
when they're showing the sort of the establishing shots of Jim's cabin, we see a bunk bed with two sets of sheets that are kind of, it's like as if the kids didn't make their bed. We see two sets of sheets on the bunk bed. So I don't know if there is another kid there somewhere. It's clearly that's kind of the implication there, is that there is
yeah.
another child.
Okay, I hadn't noticed that.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's very interesting. And then, of course, we also have this is kind of something that I initially had kind of forgotten about, but there's that pregnant lady who
Yep.
escapes the Jimmies. And
Yeah.
so, what happens to that lady? Um, does she go to the village where Spike's dad is living, and tells them basically like, your kid has become a monster, basically. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know what
No,
happens with
that's
her.
definitely something that could arise. Like the we can trust with this series so far, with these two movies, that if it's introduced, it matters.
Yes.
Like there's no superfluous mystery box bullshit going on here. It's very intentional and is there for a reason. And yeah, the that's one of the dangling threads that we can expect to be woven into the next one. Because yeah, Garland's the guy writing the whole thing. Like this is a kind of a beautiful thing that they've been allowed to make this little trilogy that nobody asked for or wanted, just because they had the stories and the ideas within them to do it. So it's very exciting on that level.
Mhm. Yeah, very excited to see where it goes. And um, the I wouldn't expect it though. What we know about the third movie right now is that the script is written. Boyle is coming back to direct, but none of the movie has been filmed. So I would expect a larger gap between this movie and the third one. We're not gonna get another one of these like 8 months later situations like we did with these two. And then also, I thought this was very interesting. Boyle has said in interviews that they are going to be looking at the 28 Days Later graphic novel that sort of bridged the gap between years and weeks. Back when that movie came out, back when Weeks came out, they
Oh,
released
really?
this. Yeah, they released this prologue graphic novel called 28 Days Later Aftermath that sort of bridged the gap between those two movies. And he said they're going to be looking at that graphic novel for sort of lore, basically, or inspiration for what they could do with this new one. And so I would encourage anybody that is interested in that graphic novel. There is they actually animated, like fully animated it and put it on YouTube. You can go watch it right now, and I would encourage anybody to go and watch that. I'll stick it in the episode description when we post this episode. But it was written by I'm sure you're familiar with Steve Niles, the guy who did 30 Days of Night.
Oh
It was
yeah,
written by him. So
yeah. So I was not aware of that. That's gonna
yeah.
be that's next on my list, right
Mm.
after No Other Choice. But
Yeah.
moving on to the mentionables.
Yeah. Do you want me to go with mine first here?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So basically, yeah, my mentionable this week, every now and then I talk about an album, a music album. And this week, very interesting one, a album from ASAP Rocky, his first album in 7 years. It's called Don't Be Dumb. And this is really an interesting album because he collaborated with Tim Burton,
What?
which is on this album. Yeah, this reminds me of about a decade ago, the rapper Wale made an album with Jerry Seinfeld, and
That's
this kind of
right.
this reminds me of that. And so I don't know to what extent. I mean, it's not like Tim Burton is on the album rapping. You never hear Tim Burton rapping. So he's not on this album as as a musical contributor, but he is with like the art and I think some of the themes and stuff like that. I know the album art was done by Tim Burton.
Wow.
But yeah, this is really interesting. This is more experimental than ASAP Rocky's older stuff. A lot of his older stuff, I guess, is what people would call, I don't know, like club bangers, I guess. But this is way more experimental, and I really, really enjoy kind of what he's doing. Between this and ASAP Rocky's acting performances in 2025, he's branching out. He's doing some interesting things, I think, and because he was in both that Rose Byrne movie that she got a lot of accolades for. What was that called again? If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You, I think is what it's called. And
Really?
he was also, yeah. ASAP Rocky was like one of the supporting performers in that, and he was also in the Spike Lee movie from last year, Highest to Lowest.
Yeah,
So
that makes sense.
yeah,
Okay.
so he's doing some interesting stuff, and this is no different. So yeah, check this album out if you get a chance.
That's an interesting pairing.
Hmm.
Okay. Now mine is, of course, I don't know if I think I've maybe mentioned this at one time or another, but the latest from Owlcat, the alpha for Dark Heresy. I've actually
Yeah,
gotten to dig into it a little bit more. And what differentiates this from Rogue Trader, primarily, is the fact that as an Inquisitor in this, instead of a Rogue Trader in the 40k realm, it's your job to root out, Xenos, heretics, and other, abominations to the God Emperor. And that primarily, means that this game is broken up into fronts. It's not just like RPG fetch quests, it's RPG mysteries that you need to solve. And so there's these new mechanics of like being given, like, hey, you need to figure out what happened to this Inquisitor we sent down to this ward of the Hive City. He's been missing for a while. So you go down there, you set up some equipment, and then you try and gather evidence. And then you have to like put together your explanation for what happened. Like you're playing a like DOS Sherlock Holmes mystery game, or like the Dagger of Amun Ra, like that Sierra Online point and click game. It's like, so there's, you're solving mysteries, you're fighting in like combat like a typical Owlcat turn-based RPG kind of a situation, and you're doing all the team building and role playing that you did in Rogue Trader. This is an early taste of it. You can't even build your own character yet. They give you two different scenarios from like, 'cause, like, you don't get to play the actual beginning of the game you're given after the intro, and in two different like scenarios for like what your intro choices could do to affect the story. So you're given a taste of different branching paths, and different things to do, and it's really really cool. And I'll be reporting on this more as we go along with this alpha early access that I spent $70 to be a part of, because I just enjoy this kind of thing. And I don't, because like there's not a lot of jank, like it's polished enough. It's in fact better looking than Rogue Trader was. And yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun, I think.
Did you ever by chance play Disco Elysium?
Yes, I did.
Okay. What you're describing, not obviously not with like all the combat and stuff like that, but what you were describing with like the mystery and kind of solving things your way, it reminds me of Disco Elysium, or just the way that you were speaking about it. Yeah.
No, they have different execution, but it's very much the same spirit, where it's like depending on who you have in your team, you'll learn different things, and if you have to ask the right questions, you have to make the right connections between information that you have, because you can make the wrong one, and then there's consequences for being wrong, which is what's great about it, is that like it's not just this, there's a binary path, there's the right one. Like you can make the wrong call, and then you live with the consequences of that wrong decision, which I think is going to make for a really rich experience when it's all said and done. Because, depending on how thorough you are, and depending on how, intuitive and critical thinking you're able to be, like you can suss out the right answer, but there's enough red herrings for you to like basically accuse the wrong person and have them be immolated, like that's an outcome that can occur. And then you have to live with the fact that the real culprit has eluded you, and that can affect the story in certain ways, I'm sure. But that does it.
Sounds fun.
That does it for this week. It was a lot of fun. A little, maybe it's funny, like we had less on our list, but we talked just as long as we usually do.
Sure.
We'll see you all next week. We're gonna, or not next week, in a couple weeks, we're gonna be talking about what was the name?
Mother of Flies.
Mother of Flies from the Addams Family. Looking forward to that one. Take care, everybody, and have a good one.
See ya.